Let's jump into this quick intro video about rational numbers. You just learned about integers, so we're going to build on that knowledge, and this is just going to be some foundation for the rest of this grid. So what is a rational number? We're going to talk about that, but we're going to actually start with whole numbers so we know what they are. So I'll give you the directions and talk about these numbers in just a second, but let's get these words figured out. You do not have to write this part down. I just want you to know what they are. And so I'm going to show you all of these, but I want to start with the whole numbers because that's going to build up from where we go. So whole numbers, just so you know, are positive counting numbers and zero. So these are only the positive whole numbers. I know I'm using the word there, but it really is a whole number. So no decimals, no fractions, and in this case, no negatives. So positive counting numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. And zero. So from 0 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, those would be whole numbers, okay? Integers are virtually the same thing. The only difference now is you include the whole numbers and their opposites, which we'll talk more about in the next video, but that basically means they're negatives, right? So whole numbers, and then we're talking about like whole negatives, right? So for example, 1 and -1, and then also 0. So again, integers do not include decimals or fractions yet, but now we're adding in negatives. So that's the difference between whole number and integer. And then the last one is rational number. Now this wording is going to sound a little confusing, but I'll give you some examples in a moment. Rational numbers are numbers that can be written as A over B, so meaning like a fraction, so like one number over another number, where B is not 0. We just can't have 0 because then that becomes like a non-existent number. If you're dividing a number by 0, we can't do that. But anywho, so what we're saying is it could be written as A over B. It doesn't mean it has to, it just means it could, okay? Like for example, if I take the number 75 and I put a 1 underneath it, right, 75 over 1, that means the same thing. We don't write 75 that way, but we can put it as a fraction. Same with this. If I have 35 hundredths, I could put 35 over 100 and simplify it down or whatever, but anywho, it would be a number I could put as a fraction. Okay, same thing with -3. I could put -3 over 1, and that would be a way to write it as a fraction. So just a rational number can be put as a fraction. So rational numbers include whole numbers, integers, and now we're talking about fractions and decimals. But when we're talking about the fractions and decimals, right, it can't be a decimal like the way pi is a decimal. We're talking about either a terminating decimal like this, or it could be a repeating decimal. For example, if I write 1/3, that would be 0.33333 repeating. That would also be a rational number because you can write it as a fraction, okay? So anyways, without further ado, let's go ahead and place these. So this Venn diagram means that like if it's inside the other category, it means it applies to all of those, right? So like, for example, 75. 75 is a whole number because it's positive, right? It's a positive counting number, but it also would be considered an integer, and it's also considered a rational number. So this would work for all three categories. So we're putting it down in whole numbers so we show that it works for all three categories. Okay, so go ahead and write that if you haven't already. 0.35 or 35 hundredths, that is just going to be a rational number. It is not a whole number or integer because it is a decimal, and that whole numbers and integers do not include that. Okay, -3 is going to be an integer, and you can place these wherever you'd like in here, by the way, as long as they're in the right section. -3 is going to be an integer. It is not a whole number. See, it's on the outside like that. It's not a whole number because it's not a positive counting number. But it is an integer because it's the opposite of a whole number, and that is what an integer is, so it's also a rational number as well. And the last one, 3/4, will just be a rational number because it's not a whole number, it's not an integer, it is just a rational number because it's a fraction. Okay, so now what you need to do is, once you've placed those numbers, you need to now add your own example for each category. So I should see 3 new numbers on here, and then get a teacher signature. Good luck, and move on to the next thing.